I have two little things that are ephemeral, I guess. One is poem. It's called Poetry Reading. A winged ant struggles across a worn-out Persian rug. The other is, particularly this last panel, got me thinking in some odd directions. This is a manuscript that I've been shopping around, and I wrote my elevator pitch, that it speaks to a Jewish universe that is hardly ever addressed by literature, which is to say secular, assimilated, and trying to figure out what the tradition means to us. And various people have said to me, well, Jewish literature's not in, so that's probably not going to sell the book. And I was sitting there, particularly listening to Mark O'Brien, and I got to thinking about diaspora and pilgrimage and the way in which one of my friends says that I should pitch this book, which is that all of the people who are more or less second generation something, a friend of mine is Catholic, so that counts too, who are non-observant, who are not fully engaged with the tradition of their ancestry. Many of us are struggling to figure out our relationship to that. And that's really the broader audience for the book. So that I have to reword my elevator pitch. You all know what an elevator pitch is, right? Yeah. But the idea of diaspora and pilgrimage being in some ways the same thing, that what you're doing is it's a way to go home. Pilgrimage is a way to go home. And those of us who are in diaspora are trying to figure out where home is. And to some extent that it has something to do with traditions that we were raised with. I want to start with one of the poems that is actually well within the book, but it works from that idea of walking in, of pilgrimage. The Hebrew word, which is translated as the law, is halakha, which really means to walk. It is a way of walking. And I once said to a rabbi that I understand it much better if I think in terms of Native American spirituality. These are life ways. He got all upset because one of the slanders about Judaism is just tribal. It is both tribal and universal. That's always been the problem. But this is about that. It's called mechitza. And the mechitza is the curtain that goes between men and women in an Orthodox synagogue if they don't have a balcony. If they have a balcony, the women are up in the balcony. Sometimes behind the mechitza as well. It begins with an epigraph from Angela Hernandez Nunez, who's a Dominican friend of mine. I've translated what she says. She says, "It's long and unfamiliar, the road of returning to myself. I work at making it real, asphalt with concrete curbs. Sometimes I imagine my great-grandparents standing by the side. His face is hidden by his black beard. Hers is in shadow. A burning yahrzeit candle sits on a shelf in a kitchen miles away. I walk past the blank-faced houses, the stories of pogroms and wars, the family history no one ever told. No one has imagined my life, a woman with no family to cook for, no children to bless. This is not a complaint. My hands know more than I do, touching old wine cups, prayer shawls, braided bread. I will not cover my hair. I will not accept the mechitza, the seat in the balcony behind a screen. A pair of candle flames glows through the window. A little at a time, I begin to read the old language, though it is still an iron grate, a bricked-up window. When I put my ear to the wall, I hear men's voices, a sobbing sound. And I'm going to kind of read some things from the book, not a full sequence, but kind of in the order in which they are, except that one's further back. This is the first poem in the book. It's called Cholent, and Cholent is kind of like crock-pot food. You make it the day before. It's usually meat and beans, and some recipe that I heard about somewhere had prunes in it, so I've rendered it as meat and fruit. It is, okay. So the title is Cholent. And there's a quote here, Arbeit macht frei, which is what the Nazis put on the gates of the concentration camps. Not just Auschwitz, as I was told by a guy at a Holocaust museum. The tradition is a stone building, windows filled with yellow light. Black letters, square and mysterious as granite. Wrought iron, that other voice, Arbeit macht frei, spreading its arms across the gate. The sword turns at the door. I sit by Grandpa, a wriggling toddler, the only female in the shul. I do not see a balcony, a curtain hiding the women. Old men in black fedoras bow and sing. The echo of the flames is close in our ears. I do not know the names of Grandpa's brothers who died before I was born. Fridays, women in other houses rush about, cleaning and cooking, heating the oven to keep the cholent hot, meat and fruit, a stewing sweetness I've never tasted. My mother didn't stand, white cloth on her head, lighting candles. At Hanukkah, when I put the menorah in the window, I hear the glass breaking. Those who understand these images, those who don't. The books open the wrong way. Yellow light lies under the apple trees like honey. From pictures at an exhibition, I hope you mostly know the Mussorgsky. I've had arguments with people about whether this is fair to Mussorgsky, but so what? Two Jews argue on a street in Eastern Europe, late 19th century. Stone, soot and grit, stone buildings, draft horses haul wagons along the cobbled streets. Somewhere nearby, my grandfather is helping to print pamphlets and dreaming of revolution. Last year he quit yeshiva, and he's still arguing with his father, who prefers not to make trouble. In Mussorgsky's music, the big pompous left hand of the piano talks down to the little skinny tinkling keys. In Ravel's familiar orchestration, low strings and muted trumpet, a klezmer voice. The big man has a white silk cravat, a black Homburg, velvet lapels. The little one has holes in his shoes, frayed cuffs on a threadbare jacket. My grandfather is afraid that he'll be drafted, sent away for 30 years of hard labor and anti-Semitic harassment. He'd rather go to jail. Mussorgsky thinks they're funny, these two. The one who thinks he has power, the one who doesn't. I went to Germany on a study tour probably 30 years ago. I liked the place. And this is what came out of that, although some years later. It's called Snapshot. It uses conditori, which is like a fancy bakery or delicatessen in a German city, and Gemütlichkeit, which the poem kind of explains, but it's the kind of atmosphere, a really like Friends kind of bar, or a really comfortable restaurant that doesn't overcharge and the food is really great. That's Gemütlichkeit. Snapshot. It's somewhere in Europe, Poland or Germany. You can tell by the buildings. The two of them look so carefree, but it's hard to say who they are. Newlyweds, good friends on holiday. The picture is blurry, as if floating underwater. I don't know if they were relatives of mine. But I feel drawn into that city square, the old buildings squatting, stolid as burgomeisters, where people are hiding in cellars filled with fine old wines. My mouth waters at the memory of conditori with their chocolate-wrapped marzipan balls. In American, we have no equivalent to Gemütlichkeit, or the white sausages, tasty but slightly obscene, the white asparagus picked before the sun got to it. I sent an earlier version of this manuscript to Jeffrey Levine at Tupelo. I don't know why I did that, but partly because he's involved with Coleraine, and I was still kind of trying to ask myself whether I want to bother spending all that money to go to Coleraine. So he wrote me back and he said he thinks I close my poems too much. He likes something more elliptical. And this poem is a reaction to that, a response to that, and it is elliptical, although it's also a lot my kind of thing, and it's subtitled For My Unknown Ancestors. Aleph, broken, slides from her warm soup into bitter air, breathes but does not cry, the start of a life without promises, the dirty floor where language will creep but no one hears it. She is the first child. Describe poverty. Describe the ache to say. Ellipsis, not the egg, but disconnection. When she is old enough to read, the letters crack and fall apart, flakes of burnt paper. She is a window with a missing pane. Wind blows through on winter nights. Her father's hat and beard hunch over the kitchen table, a shawl over his shoulders, his hand trembling with chill as he traces the lines of text. I got interested in a number of themes in this book. One of them is my parents' deaths and my reaction to that. And I started writing, well, I'll read you the first one of these because it's a lot of fun, and then I may have time for a few more. But I was at the International Conference on the Fantastic and the Arts, and there were a couple of women who do science fiction poetry, and she had a challenge that you write within 24 hours, a poem to one of a couple of different prompts. And one of them was to write a poem that pretended to be or was a dictionary definition. So this is what came out of that. And there are probably half a dozen, maybe a few more poems in this book that are pretending to be, or in some way are, dictionary definitions. And the whole theme of language and the way that language creates worlds kinds of flows through this. I have to warn you, if you were reading it on a page, you would immediately notice that it is full of puns. Dreadful puns. The poem is called Apocalypse. Noun. Definition 1. The ruined temple of the goddess Calypso, once the center of her cult. Located at the highest point of the city, Calypsos, of which she was patroness, destroyed during a 50-year war with a neighboring city-state. The sun has blasted the bas-reliefs of her warrior kings. 2. A scrubby tree of semi-arid regions with gray-green foliage and a peculiar but pleasant pungency, often used in dry flower arrangements. The main food of Ursus tedius, a small plush-furred quadruped. They sit in pairs among the branches, endlessly grooming each other. 3. A set of books containing names omitted or expunged from the New York telephone directory, held by certain groups to be the true record of the population. On sacred occasions, the names are read out in the city squares. 4. A type of speech impediment characterized by excessive sibilance, thought to have been the sound made by certain ancient prophetesses when under the influence of their deity. Dreadful puns. So that was the first one. This is a later one. How am I on time?
2 more poems.
Okay. This is called Conundrum. Also a noun. 1. A riddle. How can it be that the self evaporates, rising like a wisp of steam off the body, diffused into air? One moment, a pudgy 2-year-old, I respond laughing to my young mother, lovely in her high cheekbones and auburn hair. The next, there is no one there. 2. A question or problem having only a conjectural answer. You need to interview the old folks. I recall tying saddle shoes, their white chalked with polish but still smudged. The back seat of the old black Studebaker, falling downstairs, dreaming of falling downstairs. Too late now to ask what they remembered. Daddy working in the family store after school, Mom and her aunt, new immigrants, smiling at the camera, squinting into the autumn sun. 3. An intricate and difficult problem. Someone is required to identify the body before burial. The golem, without the sacred name. In the open coffin, red lipstick my mother might have worn, white hair sprayed stiff as she would never do, only the bones of her face, perhaps, familiar. And maybe just one more, let's see.
Do you have Shekinography?
Yeah, I do. You want me to read that? Question is, where is it?
Consult the table of contents.
Yes, that's what I'll do, in fact. Although the page numbering is not good anymore.
It's a conundrum.
Here it is. Shekhinah is the way I've always heard it pronounced. And one of the things I'm wearing around my neck is a representation of it. The definition is the epigraph. The perceptible manifestation of God in the world, the female emanation, what abides with the exiled children of Israel, that part of God in exile from Godhead according to Kabbalist tradition, which human holiness helps to reconcile. Indwelling, dwelling in the body as a house, as the world, dwelling in the darkness and the light which is darkness, the galaxy spreading in space and fire, the stars above the roof, going in, ongoing, be here with us. Indwelling, dwelling in the body as a house, in the world as a dwelling. Indwelling, dwelling in the body as a world, as a house, a tree exploding with birds in the darkness which is light among exiles. The birds flying into windy sky, be here with us. Indwelling, dwelling in the world as a body, as a house, in the darkness which is the light we reach to touch you, be here with us. Presentness, be here with us. Here with us. Thanks.